The following is an alphabetical list of topics related to Canadian Aboriginals, comprising the First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. 0 to 9. 1969 White Paper. 1981 Restigouche A. Art Sister Markin. Abenaki Mythology. Aboriginal Christian Television System, Aboriginal Curatorial Collective, Aboriginal Day of Action, Aboriginal Food Security in Canada, Aboriginal Land Claim, Aboriginal Multimedia Society of Alberta, Aboriginal Peoples in Northern Canada, Aboriginal Nurses Association of Canada, Aboriginal Peoples Television Network, Aboriginal People's Party, Aboriginal People's Party of Canada, Aboriginal Police in Canada, Aboriginal Title, Aboriginal Rights Activist, Aboriginal Voices, Aboriginal Whaling, Agreement respecting a new relationship between the Cree Nation and the Government of Quebec, Aleutian Tradition, Allied Tribes of British Columbia, Amauti, Inuit Parka, Ungaku, Anglo-Métis, Anishinaabe Traditional Beliefs, Anishinaabe Tribal Political Organizations, Archaic Period in the Americas, Arctic Council, Arctic Small Tool Tradition, Assembly of First Nations Leadership Conventions, Athabascan Languages, Attorney General of Canada v. Lavelle, Azaban, Beat Band Society, Battle of Cut Knife, Battle of Duck Lake, Battle of Fallen Timbers, Battle of Fish Creek, Battle of Fort Pitt, Battle of Frenchman's Butte, Battle of Hudson's Bay, Battle of Loon Lake, Battle of Long Sault, Battle of the Belly River, Battle of Seven Oaks, Bannock, Beaver Wars, Bell of Batoche, Buduk, Bibliography of Canada, Big Bear, Burnock Culture, Blackfoot Language, Blackfoot Music, Blackfoot Religion, Blonde Eskimos, Bloody Falls Massacre, Bridge River Rapids, British Columbia Aboriginal Treaty Referendum 2002, British Columbia Treaty Process, British North America Acts, Brockett 99, Burnt Church Crisis, Bungi Language, C. Calder v. British Columbia, Canada, Canadian Aboriginal Law, Canadian Aboriginal Syllabics, Canadian House of Commons Standing Committee on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, Canadian Indian Residential Schools System, Canadian Polar Commission, Canadian Senate Standing Committee on Aboriginal Peoples, Caribou Inuit, Centre for Indigenous Theatre, Centre for World Indigenous Studies, Chief Pontiac, Chimney Rock, Chippewas of Sanya Band v. Canada, Christchurch Royal Chapel, CHRSFM. Classification of Indigenous Peoples of the Americas. Indigenous Languages of the Americas. Arctic Cultural Area, Subarctic Culture or Area, Eastern Woodlands Cultural Area, Plains Cultural Area, Northwest Plateau Cultural Area, Northwest Coast Cultural Area, Coast Salish Peoples, Coast Salish Art, Coast Salish Languages, Coast Tsimshian, Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, Constitution Act 1982, Council of Three Fires, Section 25 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Copper Inuit, Corbière v. Canada, Cree Syllabics, Crewfoot, Culture of the Tlingit, D. Daniels v. Canada, De Bar J.H. Music Theatre Group, Declaration of the Lilue Tribe, Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Definitions and Identity of Indigenous Peoples, Delgamuuk v. British Columbia, Disc Number, Dorset Culture, Douglas Treatise, Dreamcatcher, The Dead Dog Cafe Comedy Hour, Eastern Woodlands Tribes, Agushawa, Enumclaw and Kipunas, Eskimo, Eskimo Aleutian Languages, Eskimo Kissing, European colonization of the Americas, French colonization of the Americas, British colonization of the Americas. X over date. F. Federal interlocutor for MEAQTIs and non-status Indians. Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations. First Nations. First Nations Bank of Canada. First Nations Composer Initiative. First Nations Government. First Nations Health Authority. First Nations Periodicals. First Nations Police. First Nations Summit. First Nations Technical Institute. First Nations Transportation. First Nations University Students Association. First Nations University of Canada. First Nations in Alberta. First Nations in Atlantic Canada. First Nations in British Columbia. First Nations in Manitoba. First Nations in New Brunswick. First Nations in Ontario. First Nations in Quebec. First Nations in Saskatchewan. First Nations language. First Nations music. First Nations social issues. First Nations studies. First Peoples Heritage, Language and Culture Council. First Battle of Bloody Creek. 5 medals. Folsom Point. Folsom Tradition. Franco-Indian Alliance. Fraser Canyon War. French and Indian War. Battle of Fort Beausage or Siege of Louisbourg. Battle of Fort Frontenac. Battle of Beauport. Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Battle of St. Foy. Battle of Restigouche, July 3–8. Battle of Signal Hill, September 15, 1762. Food of the Tlingit. Frog Lake Massacre. Fort Defiance. Fort Fraser, British Columbia. Fort Garry. Fort St. Vrain. Fort Simpson. Fort St. James, British Columbia. Fort Stikine. Fort Vancouver. Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. Fort Vasquez. Fort Ware, British Columbia. The Fur Trade at Lachine National Historic Site. Fur Brigade. Fred Quilting Quarry. Fur Seal. G. Gabriel Dumont. Gabriel Dumont Institute. Genetic History of Indigenous Peoples of the Americas. Y-DNA haplogroups in Indigenous Peoples of the Americas. Gradual Civilization Act. Grand Council of Treaty 3. Grand River Land Dispute. Great Peace of Montreal. Great Spirit. Gitch Manitou. Gitxsan Language. Gitxsan Treaty Society. Gluskap. Gustafsson Lake Standoff. H. Haplogroup CM217. Haplogroup QM242. Haplogroup QMEH2. Haplogroup QNWT01. Haplogroup QP89.1. Haplogroup QM3. Haplogroup R1. Haldimand Proclamation. Hamatla Treaty Society. Haida Argolite Carvings. Haida Language. Haida Manga. Haida Mythology. Haida Language. Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump. Heiltsuk Language. High Arctic Relocation. History of Canada. History of Alberta #pre-Confederation. History of the West Coast of North America. History of Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh Longshoremen 1863–1963. Hivanants. Hopewell Tradition. Hudson's Bay Company. Hulkaminam Treaty Group. Igloo. Ihamiat. Indian Act. Indian Agent. Indian Department. Indian Health Transfer Policy. Indians of Canada Pavilion. Indian Posse. Indian Register. Indian Residential Schools Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Indian Reserve. Indian Settlement. Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. Indigenous Archaeology. Indigenous Dialogues. Indigenous. Indigenous Intellectual Property. Indigenous Knowledge. Indigenous Language. Indigenous Languages of the Americas. Indigenous Medicine. Indigenous Music. Indigenous Peoples by Geographic Regions. Indigenous Peoples of the Americas. Indigenous Peoples of the Pacific Northwest Coast. Inspire. Inspire Awards. International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs. Institute of Indigenous Government. Inupiaq, Inuit Alush, Inuit Art Museum of Inuit Art, Inuit Astronomy, Inuit Boots, Inuit Broadcasting Corporation, Inuit Circumpolar Council, Inuit Circumpolar Conference, Inuit Culture, Inuit Diet, Inuit Dog, Inuit Grammar, Inuit Language, Inuit Mask, Inuit Music, Inuit Mythology, Inuit Numerals, Inuit Phonology, Inuit Sushimajachakami, Inuit Snow Goggles, Inuit Syllabary, Inuit Tape, Period Kanatami, Inuit Throat Singing, Inuit Weapons, Inuinactin, Inuktitute, Inuktitute Writing, Inuktitute Syllabics, Inuvialuktun, Inuvialut Settlement Region, Inukshuk, Inuktitute, Isuma, Iroquois, Iroquois Kinship, Iroquois Mythology, Ipperwash Crisis, James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, James Bay Cree Hydroelectric Conflict, Yenu, Jesuit Missions in North America, Jordan's Principle, Journal of Aboriginal Health, Journal of Indigenous Studies, Juno Award for Aboriginal Recording of the Year, Kabluna, Kahnawake Gaming Commission, Kahnawake Iroquois and the Rebellions of 1837–38, Kainai, Kamloops Wawa, Kayak, Kwakewala, Kwakwakawaf Mythology, Kwakwakawaf Art, Kwakwakawaf Music, Kagadons Press, Koyukons, King George's War, King William's War, Kwade Dansenchi, Kwakwakawaf, Kwakwakawaf Art, Kruger and Al. V. The Queen, Kudlik, L. Lacrosse, Lachine Massacre, Land Ownership in Canada, Laurel Complex, List of Algonquin Chiefs, List of Archaeological Periods, Lithic Stage, Archaic Stage, Formative Stage, Classic Stage, Post-Classic Stage, List of bibliographical materials on the potlatch, List of Canadians, Hashtag Aboriginal Leaders, Big Beck Leaderbrandt, Joseph Mohawk Leaderbrandt, Mary, leader of Six Nations Women's Federation, Real Lewis, leader of 2 QTI's uprisings, Pierpont Cree Chief Tecumseh, Shawnee leader Nicholas 1780–1785 c. 1865, her chief of the Okanagan people and jointly chief of the Nyakapamiks, Nicola Athapaskan Alliance in the Nicola Valley and of the Kamloops group of the Sequapech, Kumshawa 18th century Haida chief at the inlet now bearing his name, Maquina 18th century New Charnul chief, Wickaninish 19th century New Charnul chief, August Jack Catsalano, Squamish Joe Capilano, Squamish, Harriet Navani, Squamish and New Charnul Vandy Paul, Squamish Frank Calder, NISGAA Elijah Harper, Cree and Orojibwe, Gujar or modern-day Haida leader Sean Atleo, William Bainon Rose Charlie Arthur Wellington Clark Heber Clifton Harley Dejale Alfred Du Dorwood, Chief Shakes Dan George, Slay Wartuth First Nation Joseph Gosnell, NISGAA Simon Gunnanut, Gitexan Chief Hunter Jack SDATIMC, Mary John Senior Clatacine, Silkuon War Chief, surrendered on terms of amnesty in times of war, hanged for murder, Koya 18th century Chief of the Haida George Manuel, Shanor Dithat Stuart Philip Stephen Point, Modern Stowe, James Soward, Kwakwakawaf Alec Thomas Walter Wright, List of Chinook jargon place names, List of community radio stations in Canada, List of conflicts in Canada, List of English words from indigenous languages of the Americas, List of First Nations governments, List of First Nations people, List of First Nations peoples, List of Indian reserves in Canada, List of Indian reserves in Canada by population, List of Indian residential schools in Canada, List of indigenous peoples, List of Canadian Inuit, List of QTI's people, List of place names in Canada of Aboriginal origin, List of place names of indigenous origin in the Americas, List of pre-Columbian cultures, List of tribal councils in British Columbia. List of writers from peoples indigenous to the Americas. Looting of Battleford. Louis Riel, Trial of Louis Riel. Louis Riel, a comic strip biography. Maca language. Malsumus, Manitoba band-operated schools. Manitou, Maritime Archaic. McKenna McBride Royal Commission. McNally Robinson Aboriginal Book of the Year Award. Michif language. Minister of Aboriginal and Northern Affairs. Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development. Mitchell v. MN. Models of Migration to the New World. Moko Takan. Meech Lake Accord. Anglo-Emia QTI's Métis Child and Family Services Society. Emia QTI's Flag. Emia QTI's French Métis Comprehensive Land Claim Agreement. Emia QTI's National Council. Emia QTI's Nation of Alberta. Emia QTI's in Alberta. Emia QTI's Nation British Columbia. Emia QTI's Community Association of Vancouver, Manitoba. Emia QTI's Federation. Emia QTI's Nation Saskatchewan. Emia QTI's Nation of Ontario. Emia QTI's Population Betterment Act. Emia QTI's Sur-Mer, Quebec. Emia QTI's People Métis of Maine. Miss Six Nations. Mixed Blood. Mohawk language. Mukluk. Music of Nunavut and Nardine languages. Nanfan Treaty. Nanibawa-Wekwa. Nanook of the North. National Aboriginal Day. National Aboriginal Health Organization. Native American Cuisine. Native American Art. Native Education Center. Native Friendship Center. Native Women's Association of Canada. New World. Nicola language. Nicole Redhead. 9 Years War. NISGAA Final Agreement. NISGAA language. Notable Aboriginal people of Canada. North American Fur Trade. Northwest Coast Art. Northwest Indian War. Northern Regional Negotiations Table. Northwest Company. Northwest Fur Company. Northwest Rebellion. Norton Tradition. Numbered Treaties. Treaty 5 September 1875. Treaty 6 August September 1876. Treaty 8 June 1899. Treaty 11 June 1921. Nunavut. Nunasiavumiatat. Nunavut Arctic College. Nunavut Land Claims Agreement. Nukluk. New Charnulth mythology. Nuxalk language. Ojemawaj Tribal Council. Ojibwe writing systems. Oavekyala language. Oka Crisis. Okachita. Old Copper Complex. Old Crow Flats. One Dead Indian. Onquinway. Ontario Manamata Disease. Ozet Indian Village Archaeological Site. Paleo-Eskimo. Paleo-Indians. Payapuit. Paulet Caveat. Patun. Panatanguishene Bay Purchase. Pitiquahana Piwian. Pound Maker Cree Nation Plano Culture. Plank House. Plastic Shaman. Katiliniite. Plains Indians. Point Peninsula Complex. Population History of American Indigenous Peoples. Potlatch. Pontiac's Rebellion. Powwow. Pauli Ruling. Pierre de Troyes. Chevalier de Troyes. Pitiquahana Piwian. Prince Albert Volunteers. Pre-Columbian. PWI Diguzing Ni Yazhing Advisory Services. Q. Kiviat. Queen Anne's War. RV. Badger. RV. Marshall. RV. Bernard. RV. Marshall. RV. Drybones. RV. Gladstone. RV. Gonzales. RV. Guerin. RV. Sparrow. RV. The Van der Peet. Rancherie. Re-Eskimos. Red Paint People. Red River Rebellion. Red River Oxcart. Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Royal Proclamation of 1763, Rupert's Land, Rupert's Land Act 1868 S, St. Catherine's Milling v. the Queen, St. Jude's Cathedral, St. Lawrence Iroquoians, Salishan Languages, Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies, Saugeen Complex, Saugeen Tract Agreement, Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982. Section 25 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Secwepech Cultural Education Society, Secwepech Museum and Heritage Park, Seven Nations of Canada, Shamanism among Eskimo peoples, Shingwalk Inumajgamik, Sikiti, Societal, 60 Years' War, a military struggle for control of the Great Lakes region in North America, encompassing several generations, French and Indian War, Pontiac's Rebellion, Lord Dunmore's War, frontier warfare during the American Revolution, Northwest Indian War, War of 1812, Skyelep, Skookum, Squamish people, Squamish culture, Squamish history, Squamish language, Sled Dog, Spoken Languages of Canada, #Aboriginal Languages, Squaw, Steamsits Language, Status of First Nations Treaties in British Columbia, Stereotypes of Native Americans, Stow, Low, Slahill, Soulcatcher, Spirit of Haida-Gwaii, Sundance, T. The Canadian Crown and Aboriginal Peoples, Teiagan, Tears Nvues, Land Insights, The Great Peacemaker, Three Sisters, Thunderbird Park, Thule People, Tlingit Language, Togling Harpoon, Totem Pole, Travois, Treaty of 1818, Treaty of Fort Niagara, Treaty of Hartford, Tribal College Librarians Institute, Tikigak, Treaty of Fort Niagara, Tribal Council, Tsimshian Mythology, Tungavik Federation of Nunavut, Two-Spirit, Uelu, Urban Indian Reserve, Umiak Unceded Territory, Union of Ontario Indians, Uyuatuk, v. Vancouver Aboriginal Child and Family Services Society, Vancouver MEAQTI's Community Association, W. Wab Norm Bomjiwang Association of First Nations, Wampum, Wakashan Languages, Wawate Native Communications Society, War of 1812 Campaigns, Niagara Campaign, Tecumseh's War, Warcanoe, Western Confederacy, Wigwazabak, Winalagala Treaty Group, Windigo First Nations Council, Wolseley Expedition, World Council of Indigenous Peoples, Working Group on Indigenous Populations, Wyandotte Religion, XA, YTEM, Yellowkill College, Yupik Languages, Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council, Search all pages with prefix, all pages beginning with Aboriginal, all pages beginning with First Nations, all pages beginning with Inuit, all pages beginning with MEAQTIs. Search all pages with title, all pages with titles containing Aboriginal, all pages with titles containing First Nations, all pages with titles containing Inuit, all pages with titles containing MEAQTIs.